Hello, my name is Natalia Ortiz, and in this video, I'm going to talk about how Montejano explains the problems that Mexican Americans face and how I Am Joaquin, Yo Soy Joaquin, shows how people react to those problems emotionally. Both of these sources talk about the same history, but they explain it in different ways. Montejano focuses on laws, system, and history. He explains what happened after the United States took over Mexican land. He shows how Mexican people were treated unfairly even after they were promised rights. His work helps us understand how the government and legal system failed them. I Am Joaquin, on the other hand, is a poem. It does not talk about laws or dates. Instead, it talks about feelings. It shows anger, sadness, pride, confusion, and strength. It helps us understand what life felt like for Mexican Americans. To me, it feels like Montejano explains the problem and the poem explains the pain. Montejano shows what happened, the poem shows how it hurts. They are both important. Without Montejano, we might not understand the history. Without the poem, we might not understand the emotions. Together, they give us the full story. One sentence from Montejano that really stood out to me is when he explains that Mexicans became U.S. citizens after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, but were still treated like outsiders. This means that even though the laws say they were American citizens, people did not treat them like they were. Basically, on paper, they were citizens. In real life, they were not. They were still judged, they were still disrespected, and they were still pushed aside. This matters because it shows that laws alone do not create equality. Just because the government says something is fair does not mean society will act fair. Many Mexican families lost their land through cheating and unfair court cases. Some could not read English, so they were tricked into signing papers. Others were threatened or forced to leave. They lost their homes, money, and safety. To me, this is really upsetting because they were promised protection, but they were betrayed. Imagine trusting a treaty and then watching everything be taken away from you. It makes me think about how painful it must have been to feel powerless in your own country. Now, one line from I Am Joaquin, Yo Soy Joaquin, that really stood out to me is, I am Joaquin, lost in a world of confusion. This line is simple but very powerful. When I hear these lines, I think about someone who does not know where they belong. Someone who feels stuck between two worlds. Mexican Americans were no longer fully accepted as Mexican, but they were also not accepted as American. They were in the middle. They spoke Spanish at home. They were expected to speak English outside. They had Mexican traditions, but American society rejected them. That will make anyone feel confused. To me, these lines show sadness and frustration. It shows someone searching for identity and respect. It feels like the poet is saying, I don't know where I fit anymore. These two quotes connect because they describe the same struggle in different ways. Montejano explained how the system failed Mexican Americans. The poem shows how that failure felt emotionally. Montejano talks about courts, land, and citizenship. The poem talks about confusion, pain, and identity. Montejano gives facts. The poem gives feelings. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo promised three main things: protection, lands, and citizenship. But Montejano shows that these promises were broken. So people felt angry, they felt hurt, they felt lied to. That is why I Am Joaquin exists. It is a response to injustice. It is saying, you might have changed the border, but you did not change who we are. To me, this means that Mexican Americans refuse to give up their culture. Even when society tries to erase them, they stay proud. Juan Cortina is a strong example of someone who fought back. He saw how Mexican people were being abused. He saw how courts ignored them. He saw how police mistreated them. So he stopped trusting the system. When laws did not work, he decided to resist. This shows how dangerous and unfair systems can be. When people felt hopeless, they might turn to rebellion. Another important idea is foreigners in their own land. Mexican people did not move away. The border moved over them. One day, they were at home. The next day, they were foreigners. That is extremely unfair. It makes me think about how painful it must feel to be treated like a stranger in the place where your family lived for generations. The podcast explains that Mexican Americans were legally citizens, but socially rejected. They could vote in some places, but were blocked in others. They could work, but were paid less. They were American only when it benefited others. This connects perfectly with Montejano and the poem. It shows discrimination was not accidental. It was built into the system. Learning about this history really changed the way I think about Mexican American experience in the United States. Before studying Montejano and I Am Joaquin, I knew that discrimination existed, but I did not fully understand how deep it went or how long it had lasted. I thought unfair treatment mostly came from individual people being rude or hateful. Now, I see that it was built into the system through laws, courts, and government decisions. What shocked me the most was realizing that Mexican Americans were promised rights and protection, but those promises were ignored. They were told they were citizens, yet they were treated like strangers. That made me feel sad, angry, because it is not fair to give people hope and then take it away. It also made me think about how painful it must have been for families to lose their lands, their homes, and their sense of security. It also connects personally to the idea of feeling lost in a world of confusion. Even though my situation is different, I understand what it feels like to wonder where you belong or to feel judged because of your background. Reading the poem helped me realize that these feelings are not new and that many people before me experienced the same struggles. Another thing that stood out to me is how strong these communities were. Even after being treated unfairly, they did not give up on themselves. They continued to value their culture, language, and traditions. That inspired me because it shows resilience and pride. It reminds me that identity is something powerful that cannot be taken away easily. Overall, this topic made me more aware, more respectful, and more grateful. It helped me understand that the rise and opportunities many people have today came from years of struggle. It also made me feel responsible to speak up when I see injustice, instead of staying silent. Learning this history is not just about the past, it is about how we choose to treat people today and in the future. To end, Montejano explains what went wrong in the past, and Ian Joaquin explains how people survive emotionally. One uses history, the other one uses feelings. Together, they show why pride, identity, and resistance became so important for Mexican Americans. Learning about this made me realize that many of these problems are happening again, especially during and after Donald Trump's presidency. His words and policies about immigrants, borders, and deportations made many Latino and Mexican Americans families feel afraid and unwanted. Just like in the past, people were treated like outsiders, even if they were citizens or had lived their whole lives. For example, when Trump talked about building a wall and called immigrants criminals, it reminded me of how Mexican people were once seen as foreigners in their own land. It showed how easily fear and stereotypes can come back. Families were separated, communities were targeted, and many people felt confused about whether they truly belong in this country. To me, this shows that history is repeating itself, the same struggles for respect, safety, and identity are still happening. That is why learning about Montejano and Ian Joaquin is so important. They help us understand that these problems did not start today, and they will not end unless people speak up and stand together. Their history teaches us that Mexican Americans have always been strong. Even when they were pushed down, they kept fighting for dignity and equality. That strength is still alive today, and it reminds us that we must continue to defend justice, respect, and human rights for everyone.